Start your engines, everyone! It's been over 10 years since Cars revved onto the scene, and it looks like the saga will cross the finish line with this third movie. Let's take this lap to reflect on the history of the iconic 95 Rust-eze car known as Lightning McQueen, and take a road trip to Radiator Springs when we're done. I'm Joe with channel Frederator, and today we're counting down 107 facts about cars. Let's get started! Before we dive into the history of Cars, let's Tokyo drift into Cars 3, which was released June 16, 2017. Unlike its predecessor Cars 2, the new Pixar film follows Lightning McQueen's struggle with a new generation of racers and getting pushed out of the sport he loves. Let's just say it has a lot more heart than the previous film before it. Cars 3 was Brian Fee's directorial debut, but he's no stranger to the Cars franchise. He was a storyboard artist on both Cars and Cars 2, as well as a number of other animated projects. Despite most directors beginning with a short for Pixar before taking on a feature-length film, John Lasseter called on Fee to direct the film. While the third film in the franchise doesn't completely leave behind Radiator Springs, Cars 3 did introduce a brand new adventure that took the characters away from their beloved home. Basketball fans might recognize some real-life inspiration from McQueen's comeback storyline in Cars 3. Writer Mike Rich said he was influenced by Kobe Bryant's comeback after he injured his Achilles. He aimed to capture that same vulnerability in the film. Cars 3 was the first movie to feature the yellow 2017 CRS Sports Coupe Cruz Ramirez. A trainer at a race center, she was originally a he. While the writers initially made the switch to highlight the contrast to McQueen's character, the decision was cemented when they heard Cristela Alonso's voice and knew that she was perfect for the role. The villain in Cars 3, Jackson Storm, is younger and far more technologically advanced than Lightning. McQueen finds himself in a world where he is outdated and feels like he can no longer compete. This storyline was meant to mirror the real-life technological advancement that has taken place over the 10 years since Cars was originally released. The technology theme doesn't end in the on-screen story. John Lasseter said the real-life changes in animation technology made a noticeable difference in the production and look of the cars in the third film. It also made the large crowd scenes that stood out in the original Cars far easier to execute. Beginning in March of 2017, life-size models of Cruz Ramirez and Jackson Storm joined Lightning McQueen as part of Disney's Road to the Races nationwide tour. The cars visited 27 cities in preparation for the June 16th release of Cars 3. Jackson Storm was designed to look as new and high-tech as possible. For help, the creators enlisted former Ford Chief Executive Officer Jay Mays, who also designed the cars in Zootopia. They also brought on the help of multiple championship-winning NASCAR crew chief Ray Evernham in order to understand what NASCAR design of the future might look like. In Cars 3, viewers got to see Lightning McQueen on a more personal, emotional journey. Fans wondered if this might suggest a finality for the franchise. Pixar has remained quiet on the issue, though Brian Fee did say audiences would leave the theater feeling like it was only the beginning for Lightning McQueen. Speaking of beginnings, Cars was released in 2006, but began way back in 1998, around the time that Pixar was just finishing A Bug's Life. The original release date was November 5th, 2005, but it was pushed back to June 9th, 2006. According to the late Steve Jobs, who was at the time still a Pixar chief executive, the change was made to shift all Pixar films to a summer release schedule so that DVDs could go on sale during the holiday season. The original name for Cars was The Yellow Car, and it told the story of an electric car in a gas-guzzling world. Some concept art was made for the 1998 film, and producers agreed to make the movie and release it after A Bug's Life, around June 4th. However, the movie was scrapped for Toy Story 2. In 2001, the working title for Cars became Route 66. However, it soon had to be changed to avoid being confused with the 1960s show of the same name. Back in 1998, Jørgen Klubian, who was at the time a story development artist, began to work out a brand new feature. It was inspired by the story of one of the earlier models for an electric car made in Denmark. The car was a small three-wheeled electric car that supposedly worked well in the city, but poorly on the highway. In Klubian's mind, the tail of this electric car was similar to the Ugly Duckling. Using the two tails as inspiration, he mapped out the story for The Yellow Car. The Yellow Car started out as an American-style fairy tale, set in a small town where there were no people, only sentient cars. The foreign car would roll into town, and because of his 3 wheels and electric motor, the residents would initially distrust him, but accept him by the end. Klubian took his concept to John Lasseter, who liked what he saw for the most part. Two characters that really stuck out to Lasseter were the hippie V8 Fillmore and the Jeep Sarge. The thing Lasseter didn't like was the whimsical fairy tale angle. The small town setting was fine, but he felt that in order to create conflict, a bigger and stronger character needed to enter the small town. This would lead to the creation of Lightning McQueen. Lightning McQueen's number is 95, but it was originally 57. Lasseter wanted 57 because it's his birth year, 1957, but he changed it instead to 95 to represent Toy Story's release year, 1995. Lasseter loved the idea of combining two great family passions with this story. His mother was an artist, and his father had a passion for cars and was a salesman for Chevrolet. Bringing the two together was part of the reason Lasseter picked up the film. Another reason was due to a family road trip Lasseter took after Toy Story 2 to spend more time with his kids, something he longed to do on a regular basis. So in the summer of '99, Lasseter bought a used motorhome and traveled across America, visiting places along the interstate highway. During that road trip, Lasseter and his family became really close, and when he came back, he knew what a film like Cars had to be. He wanted a character who would learn that life is a journey, not a destination. With that in mind, it became obvious that the main protagonist had to be a race car. A character obsessed with winning and doing it as fast as possible was the perfect character to realize one of life's toughest lessons. What inspired the Pixar team the most was a 1997 documentary called Divided Highways, which followed the construction of the interstate highway. The crew learned how this affected the small highway towns, much like it did with Radiator Springs. To research Route 66, the Pixar team went on a couple road trips in rented white Cadillacs and drove along the famous highway, making several stops along the way. One of those stops was at Midpoint Cafe, a small cafe and gas station in Adrian, Texas, where the team took a rest stop. That location would go on to inspire Flo's V8 Cafe. Along with several Pixar animators and artists, the team took Michael Wallace, the author of the book Route 66, The Mother Road, on a trip to point out noteworthy stops along the way. In addition to being a book author, Michael Wallace also ended up being the voice of the sheriff in the Cars movies. Might as well make use of an expert. To get more information on how actual cars are designed, Lasseter and the team paid a visit to Detroit. They visited the three big Detroit automakers, including Ford Motor Company. The team set out to observe the patina, or the old highway towns, along Route 66. Wallace noted that every road had a distinct look based on where the road would go. It reflected the territory on both shoulders, from the licorice-colored soil of Illinois to the desert sands of the Mojave. It had that all-American look. Of course, the team was not above enjoying popular tourist hotspots. They visited the famous Cadillac Ranch, where a row of caddies are buried in the ground. The team ended up paying homage to the site in the film and painted one of the cars to commemorate the trip. Many of the main characters in the film were actually based on real people. Sally, the Porsche voiced by Bonnie Hunt, is based on Don Welch, who owns the Rock Cafe in Stroud, Oklahoma. While some of the characters in the film were influenced by local celebrities of small towns on Route 66, some minor characters were inspired by more ordinary people. The twins, Tia and Mia, were based on two servers at the Midpoint Cafe. Fillmore, the van voiced by the late comedian George Carlin, was inspired by American folk artist Bob Waldmeyer. However, Waldmeyer asked not to be acknowledged in the official credits, saying that as a strict vegetarian, he could not condone Cars toys being sold with McDonald's hamburger meals. The character of Mater was based on more than just Larry the Cable Guy. He was inspired by an actual Tow Mater tow truck in Galena that's still on display. The truck looks just as weathered as Mater, but amazingly, it still runs. Doc Hornet Hudson is an actual Hudson Hornet. Sounds redundant, but the car is famous because Hudson was the first company to get involved in stock car racing. The Hornet dominated the racing scene in the early 50s, back when stock cars were a bit more basic. The character of Lightning McQueen was a blast for the character design team, but they faced a steep challenge. Lasseter and co-director Joe Ranft started out with stock car designs, then fleshed them out with a clay sculpt, similar to what they did with real cars in Detroit. One of the biggest design inspirations came from a 1952 Disney short called Susie and the Little Blue Coupe, which was worked on by key animator Ollie Johnson, the last surviving member of Walt Disney's original animation crew. Lasseter and Ranft hit some brick walls when fleshing out Radiator Springs. The two would create characters for their hotshot race car to interact with, but kept creating seemingly intriguing storylines that would end up going nowhere. Good thing one of them finally did. The Pixar team brought in a lot of outside help to ensure the authenticity of the racing culture, like Fox Sports director Artie Kempner to consult about the art of sportscasting. Artie Kempner also helped out the camera and layout team by telling them where to put the cameras during a race. The team sat through a lot of NASCAR races, and Kempner lent his years of expertise as a sportscaster and director. During his time helping out the team, Kempner admitted that he was envious of the Pixar crew because they were able to capture shots of a race in an animated film that he could never achieve in real life. They could put a camera under a car, in the middle of the track, or do a crane shot over the track and catch all of the cars speeding by. There were a few characters that ended up falling falling by the wayside when developing the world of Radiator Springs. One of these characters was Mr. Windshields, who served as the town's optometrist. Before Owen Wilson voiced the main character Lightning McQueen, Lasseter coached him through all the storyboards and showed him how the character moved and behaved. He explained that while the script provided an idea of the character's behavior, seeing an animation really dived into the mindset of their personalities. Bobby Podesta, a directing animator, knew that Owen Wilson would be the perfect fit for McQueen. He said that Wilson's voice and comedic timing fit the mindset of a cocky, hotshot racer whose only goal in life was winning, adding that once he got in the booth, the character took on a new level of interest for Podesta. Wilson and the team looked at other famous cocky superstars to get the character of Lightning McQueen right. Animating director James Murphy looked at stars like Joe Nemeth, Muhammad Ali, and Kid Rock, who were all super cocky but still likable. To better identify with the character, Wilson looked to other famous rookie athletes. He drew inspiration from Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan in their rookie years, people with talent who seemingly came out of nowhere. There was a lot of trial and error when trying to animate the cars. A lot of factors had to be taken into account, like the make and model of each car. For example, sports cars are tighter and tend to have tighter suspension, and older cars are looser and have more of a bounce to them. Unlike most anthropomorphic vehicles, cars had the character's eyes in the windshields, similar to Tonka truck toys. Usually, the eyes are put in the headlights. According to production designer Bob Pauly, the eyes were put on the windshield to make the characters more human-like. He said that having the eyes near the mouth where the headlights were would make them more snake-like, and it was an overall off-putting design choice. Apparently, some people take great offense to having the eyes on anthropomorphic cars be on the windshield instead of the headlights. Jason Torchinsky, senior editor of Jalopnik, wrote an article criticizing the Cars franchise for putting the eyes on the windshields instead of the highlights. One of the trials that plagued the animation team was getting the cars to emote. Supervising animator Scott Clark said that getting the characters to express emotions and still look like cars was a tough hurdle to get over. Unlike other animated films, the characters didn't have hands or arms, only mouths and faces, so the team had to work with those challenges. The animation team got around this little problem by thinking outside the box and using the entire car to its fullest potential. They used the tires and suspension like arms and hands, and used the steering to suggest pointing in a certain direction. A common obstacle the animation team faced was getting references for the characters. In a film like The Incredibles, the team could simply shoot themselves and watch the footage back for facial movements and reference shots. However, they didn't have that luxury for cars, since there was no accurate way to map the human face onto a car, and besides, that would be freaky. The characters were all designed starting with paper and pencil sketches. Lasseter told the team that the characters should remain true to their origins, using the mantra, truth to materials. The production team was determined to stay as realistic as possible. They didn't want the cars to look mushy or made of clay, and that steel should behave like steel. The cars needed to be heavy and have the weight of the cars that they represent in real life. Lasseter even had meetings with the animation department to remind them that these cars can't stretch and are in fact metal cars. He showed them several examples of very loose animations to illustrate his point. The coloring and shading team also faced some hurdles. Supervisor Thomas Jordan explained his difficulties working with chrome and car paint. He went to local body shops and watched them paint cars to learn more about coloring and shading cars. From the body shop lesson, the crew picked up the process for painting the characters on the computer. They started with the base color, then added a clear coat which would give the shine, and from there, they were able to add details like a glittery metallic effect. Ooh, shiny. The biggest challenge for the technical team was generating the metallic surfaces and colors for the characters. In order to achieve the best amount of realism in the lighting, the rendering had to be more advanced than any other project Pixar worked on previously. Cars forced the team to think outside the box. In a normal Pixar film, the team could use environment maps and other matte-based programs to recreate reflections, but for Cars, they added a ray tracing capability to their RenderMan software to achieve realistic reflections on metallic surfaces. The technical team found more than one use for their new RenderMan software. They would use the new ray trace effect to generate realistic shadows from multiple light sources. The team found a multitude of uses for this new technology. Cars implemented a new technique for their films known as ground locking that kept the cars fixed on the road. In the past, characters were never aware of their surroundings in any way. With the new system, a simulation pass was built right into the model, resulting in the car sticking right to the ground. To capture the rich detail of the desert landscape and the town of Radiator Springs, Springs, a whole new department was created that was in charge of matte paintings and skyflats. Tech director Lisa Forcell reflected that digital matte paintings were a great way to get a lot of visual complexity without having to build complicated geometry or complex shaders. Forcell explained that even the clouds have a surprising amount of complexity to them. The notion they were going for was that people tended to see themselves in clouds, which the characters in Cars do as well. The animation team's favorite character by far was Mater. They loved that he was so workable because he had so many parts that could be manipulated, such as a tow cable that could be incorporated like a tail. Bill Cohn, a production designer responsible for many of the clouds and environments, said that a lot of the film had to do with cartoon realism. He drew parallels to a human universe that modeled a lot of things after themselves, so a Cars universe would do the same. This resulted in cliffs that resembled cars and stylized clouds. To achieve the stylized clouds and landscapes, designers drew inspiration from American Southwest artists, one of the biggest being Maynard Dixon, who was famous for drawing desert landscapes. The team even collected artifacts for production. When the shading and color department was studying at Manuel's body shop, they found an old beat-up bumper that had everything they wanted on it. Rust, patina, rust, more rust. They took it back with them, and when it came time to color in Mater, they used it as a reference. Pixar has always been pushing the boundaries of animation with the newest technologies. One of the biggest breakthroughs that came from Cars was something called the Universal Rig. With it, the same animation controls could be applied to every single character in the film without creating articulation components. The rigs for the characters were a lot to handle, to say the least. Each character had a set of animation controls, or A-bars, counting up to about 1,200. To give you some perspective, A-bars control the movements of specific parts of a character, very similar to human muscles. Woody from Toy Story was only made up of 712. Some characters, like Mater, had more A-bars with his tow cable, but the 4 main A-bars were in his mouth that could move in any direction. Cars could take the prize for the most populated Pixar movie ever. The team generated 120,000 cars in the stands of the races and another 2,000 in the infield during the races. For lighting, the neon lights in Act 2, where the town is revitalized, was the most complicated sequence to pull off due to the sheer amount of reflections, bright and bold lights. Of course, it was also the most rewarding when the whole scene came together. Pixar's computers got faster with each film. For Cars, the computers used were 4 times faster than the ones used for The Incredibles, and almost 1,000 times faster than the ones used for Toy Story. The soundtrack for Cars included 9 tracks from popular artists, including Rascal Flatts, John Mayer, and Chuck Berry. The remaining tracks were composed by famous Pixar songwriter Randy Newman. This would also be the last non-documentary movie for Paul Newman, the voice of Doc Hudson, before he retired in 2007. He died 1 year later after a lengthy battle with cancer, however not before he did voice work for Cars 3. This would be the last film for director Joe Ranft. He died in a fatal car accident a year before the film's release. Ranft had previously worked as a storyboard artist for other animated films, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Nightmare Before Christmas. The film was dedicated to him on release. Like all films, there are a fair amount of scenes that are lost on the cutting room floor. In a deleted scene, McQueen got separated from Mac when the two stop at a truck stop, as opposed to losing him on the road like in the finished film. In the deleted scene Lost, McQueen stumbles upon a graveyard of old cars while looking for Mac. This scene was most likely cut for the more graphic depiction of old cars. As if the deleted scenes for Cars couldn't get more graphic, Community Service ups it to 10. When faced with the standard Community Service, McQueen finds himself in the body of a steamroller because somehow the townspeople were able to transfer his engine, brain, into another vehicle, but as it turns out, it was all just a dream. In the deleted scene, Motorama Girls, we learn a lot about how Flo and Ramon hooked up. Back in the day, Flo was once part of a group of cars known as the Motorama Girls, and they visited Radiator Springs. Ramon gave each of them a paint job and fell in love with Flo, who stayed behind when the tour bus left. The scene was most likely cut for time. One of the first ideas Pixar had for the story was to have McQueen hold a charity race for the town. Cars from all over the country would have traveled to the Radiator Springs Grand Prix, giving the town new life and putting them on the map. Though this idea got scrapped in the end, the original finale for Cars took place at the Radiator Springs Grand Prix, was later used for Cars 2. When Lasseter and Brad Lewis needed an ending to the sequel, they came back to this scene and pulled it from the recycling bin. Another cut asset that got reused was the character of Finn McMissile, the super spy voiced by Sir Michael Caine. He came from a deleted scene from the original film where Sally and Lightning go on a date to a drive-in. The film showing was a spy movie starring Finn McMissile called Taxis of Death, and it featured all the high-tech gadgetry tree of a classic Bond movie. Cars 2 was the second Pixar film to have a sequel, the first being Toy Story 2. Originally, sequels were not part of Pixar's top priorities. However, that changed after the release of Cars 2. The sequel came about when Lasseter was touring the world promoting the first film. He thought about all the international customs that the Cars characters could interact with in the next story, especially Mater. Lasseter thought, what would happen if Mater drove down the wrong side of the street in the UK? And the story went from there. For Cars 2, the team tailored a few voices for international audiences. The character Jeff Gorvette was replaced with a better race car driver according to the region. Some variations include Memo Rojas for Latin America and Jan Nilsson as Flash for Sweden. Cars 2, like most Pixar films, had some scenes cut. One scene had lightning racing off the road through Germany's Black Forest, and another had Mater celebrating Oktoberfest, complete with lederhosen. Some assets from the yellow car made it into the sequel as well. In Cars 2, Mater, Finn, and Holly go to a marketplace in Paris where you can see a small little yellow car that only has 3 wheels. While Cars 2 made some money at the box office, it fell short when it came to accolades. Cars 2 was the first Pixar movie to not be nominated for any Oscars. It was also the first Pixar film to not be nominated for Best Animated Feature since 2001. When the category was first put in. The original Cars won a ton of awards and accolades. Randy Newman and James Taylor won a Grammy for the song Our Town. The two would go on to be nominated for an Oscar, but lose out to the song I Need to Wake Up from the film An Inconvenient Truth. That's not the only Oscar Cars was nominated for. The film was also nominated for Best Animated Feature. However, it lost out to Happy Feet. Cars would go on to win some awards in its time. The most prestigious award the film won was a Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature. A similarity that movie fans like to point out is that Cars shares a lot with another film, Doc Hollywood. This movie tells the story of a big-time doctor who causes a traffic accident in a small town and is tasked to fix it by working at the town's hospital. Cars has even gotten into some legal trouble. In 2011, artist Jake Mandeville sued Disney claiming that they infringed on his original creation for a television show and/or feature that he had shown to Disney employees. The case was ultimately dismissed due to flimsy evidence that the two concepts were at all similar. Unfortunately, Cars does not have a 2-disc special edition DVD. Why? At the time, Lasseter and the Pixar team were too preoccupied with future films like Ratatouille. However, a short film was included in the DVD copy of Cars, titled Mater and the Ghost Light. The film centered around Mater being chased by a mysterious light that turns out to be a lantern caught on his tow line. The short was re-released on the Pixar Animated Shorts Volume 1. Lasseter has a lot of favorite characters from the films he has directed, but his favorite from Cars was Mater. To him, Mater was so quintessentially Joe Ranft, the late co-director. Ranft left a big impression on his team as well. One of the team's artists, Steve Purcell, said that the thing Joe was most excited about when Cars was ending was creating a story community where the artists were all closer and better connected. Ranft also had a unique way of tackling problems. Story artist Dan Scanlon remembers how Ranft told his team not to look back at completed films for inspiration, but to look at their terrible original storyboards. He encouraged the artists to look at how problems were fixed from the first board to the finished product. Disney went on to make a few spin-offs of the Cars universe with the two films, Planes and Planes Fire and Rescue. Pixar was not involved with making either film, and they were released by Walt Disney Pictures instead. For the upcoming Cars 3, the film is returning to the famous Route 66, according to Michael Wallace. He confirms that the film will also visit Route 99, another famous highway on the West Coast. Lasseter revealed during the 2014 Tokyo International Film Festival that for Cars 3, they would be paying tribute to Hayao Miyazaki's Castle of Cagliostro. They plan to do this by inserting a character who was a Critian 2CV, which is a featured car model in Lupin III. Once again, I'm Joe, and thanks for watching 107 Facts About Cars. Which car is your favorite character? What new car do you want to see in Cars 3? Comment below and let us know. Don't forget to click the bell icon to become part of the notification squad. We have new videos dropping every day, so make sure to subscribe to Channel Frederator, your cartoon central on the internet.